The phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, and Daniel Brooks did not need to look at the screen to know it was bad news. It always was. He stood frozen in the dim light of the apartment, fingers tightening around a chipped coffee mug, feeling the familiar pressure in his chest, before the words were even spoken. Somewhere behind him, the radiator rattled like it was struggling to breathe, mirroring the life he had been holding together with nothing but stubborn will. Daniel Brooks was 38 years old, a mechanical engineer by training, a widower by fate, and a single father by necessity. He lived with his 8-year-old son Evan in a narrow, aging apartment in Oakland, a place with peeling paint and thin walls that remembered too much. 4 years earlier, the apartment had been a temporary shelter after the funeral. 4 years later, it was still all they had. Every morning began before sunrise, not because Daniel liked early hours, but because survival demanded them. Coffee first, bills second, hope last. Evan slept in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, sprawled diagonally across the bed, like he was trying to take up space in a world that had already taken too much from him. Daniel watched his son for a long moment, the way his chest rose and fell, the soft frown even in sleep. Evan looked so much like his mother that some mornings it felt like being punched in the ribs. Same dark lashes, same stubborn chin, same quiet resilience that had once convinced Daniel the future would be gentle. It was not gentle. On the kitchen counter sat an envelope Daniel had been pretending not to see. White, thick, official. The bank logo stared at him like an accusation. He did not open it yet. Instead, he reached for the small cardboard robot Evan had built the night before. One leg was loose, the arm hanging by tape. Daniel knelt at the table toolkit, open hands moving with the calm precision that never failed him. Machines made sense. Broken systems could be fixed. People were harder. He reinforced the joint, replaced the tape with glue, added a tiny brace made from a bent paper clip. When he finished, the robot stood straighter, stronger. Daniel exhaled, as if the repair had steadied something inside him too. That was when the memory came uninvited and sharp. A hospital room flooded with white light, his wife's hand in his, her voice weak but certain. Promise me you will keep going. Promise me Evan will grow up knowing kindness matters more than comfort. Daniel had promised. He had not known how expensive that promise would be. The envelope could wait no longer. He opened it. Words blurred, then sharpened. Missed payment. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings could begin in 60 days. Daniel closed his eyes. 60 days to save a home that barely held together. 60 days to rewrite a story that felt already written. But today of all days was supposed to be different. Pinned to the refrigerator was a neatly printed email confirmation. Final interview. North Line Engineering Group, San Francisco. Daniel had beaten hundreds of applicants. Years of quiet competence of solving problems no one else wanted had finally been noticed. The position would triple his salary, health insurance, stability, a future that did not involve calculating groceries down to the dollar. He dressed carefully, smoothing the only suit he owned, ignoring the frayed cuff. In the mirror, he saw what the world usually saw, a tired man. Average, unremarkable, someone easily overlooked. What the world did not see was the weight he carried, the mind that rebuilt failing systems, the quiet authority earned through endurance. Evan shuffled into the kitchen, hair wild eyes brightening when he saw the repaired robot. You fixed him, Dad. Daniel smiled, a real one this time. Of course I did. That is what we do. We fix things. Evan grinned and then hesitated. Big day today, right? Daniel nodded, kneeling to meet his son's gaze. Yeah. big day. As he walked Evan to school and headed for the train station, Daniel did not know that in less than an hour the world would shake. He did not know that his worth would be tested in a way no interview panel could design. He only knew that everything he loved rested on a single fragile morning, and that fate was already moving silent and unforgiving toward him. Daniel Brooks boarded the train just after 7 in the morning, and the doors sliding shut behind him with a final metallic sigh that sounded too much like a decision already made. The car was crowded with commuters who smelled of cologne coffee and quiet desperation, all of them staring at phones or windows, as if the city might offer answers if watched closely enough. Daniel stood near the poll portfolio clutched against his chest, feeling the weight of months of preparation pressing into his ribs. This was not just an interview. This was an exit, a narrow door out of a life that had been shrinking inch by inch. Northline Engineering Group had not noticed him at first. Men like Daniel Brooks rarely were. He did not network aggressively. He did not boast. He did not know the right people or say the right things at the right cocktail hours. What he did know was how to fix failing systems, how to see inefficiencies others ignored, how to step into chaos and impose order. He had saved his current company millions without ever being promoted for it. When Northline finally called, it was because someone higher up had quietly asked a simple question. Who keeps fixing what should already be broken beyond repair? Daniel replayed that question in his mind as the train rattled toward San Francisco. He had passed the first interview with calm precision, the second with restrained confidence. The final round would be with senior leadership. Decision makers. People who spoke in margins and consequences. He had spent 6 months studying Northline's infrastructure, their sustainability goals, their hidden weaknesses. He knew their numbers better than some of their managers. He knew exactly what he would say when asked why they should choose him over candidates with shinier resumes and louder voices. Because I already know how to carry responsibility without being seen. The train slowed as it approached the downtown station. Daniel checked his watch. 8:45 in the morning. The interview was at 9:30. 15 minutes to walk from the station, 15 minutes to breathe, to center himself. Enough time. He closed his eyes briefly, imagining Evan at school probably showing his robot to anyone who would look, explaining gears and joints with solemn authority. Daniel smiled despite himself. He was doing this for Evan, for the promise, for a future where fear did not dictate every decision. Across the aisle, 2 men in tailored suits laughed loudly about stock prices and weekend plans. One of them glanced at Daniel's worn briefcase and looked away just as quickly. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. Being underestimated had become a constant, almost comforting. People revealed themselves when they thought you did not matter. The train pulled into the station with a jolt. Doors opened. People surged forward. Daniel stepped onto the platform, the city unfolding around him in steel and glass and ambition. The Northline building rose in the distance, a tower of reflective confidence, 14 floors of opportunity. He could already picture the conference room, the handshake, the pause before judgment. His phone buzzed. A message from Evan's school reminding parents about early dismissal later that week. Daniel smiled, typed a quick acknowledgement, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. He took a breath, adjusted his jacket, and began walking. That was when the ground shuddered. At first it felt like dizziness, a brief misstep, as if the world itself had lost balance. Then the concrete beneath his feet rippled. A violent roar rose from the earth, deep and animal, drowning out shouts and sirens before they even began. The platform swayed. Metal screamed. Glass exploded somewhere above him, raining down like frozen stars. Daniel grabbed a support column as people fell, screamed, ran. The city convulsed around him, buildings groaning under invisible force. His portfolio slipped from his grasp, papers scattering across the trembling ground. For endless seconds that felt like minutes, the world forgot its shape. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence followed, thick and unnatural, broken only by distant alarms and the sound of someone crying nearby. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. His hands shook not from fear alone, but from the awareness of how fragile everything truly was. He looked at his watch. 9:20. 10 minutes remained. The North Line building was still standing, still waiting, still possible. Daniel bent to gather his papers, unaware that fate had not finished with him, yet unaware that the real interview was about to begin, far from any boardroom, in a place where titles meant nothing and choices revealed everything. The silence after the earthquake did not last long. Sirens began to rise in layers distant at first, then closer, weaving together into a sound that made the city feel wounded and alive at the same time. Daniel Brooks straightened, forcing his breath to slow as he shoved loose papers back into his folder. Dust coated his shoes, his jacket, his hands. He checked his watch again. 9:21 in the morning. 9 minutes to make the interview. If he really ran, he could still do it. The thought cut through him like electricity. This was still salvageable. His future was still within reach. He took 2 steps toward the exit when he heard it. Not a scream. Not a shout. A voice so weak it barely existed, slipping through the noise like a thread about to snap. "Please. Someone help me." Daniel stopped. His body reacted before his mind could argue. He turned, scanning the alley between 2 damaged buildings where debris had collapsed in a jagged pile. The voice came again, thinner this time, carried by pain and fear rather than volume. "Please, don't leave me." Daniel's grip tightened around his portfolio. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving. Evan's face flashed in his mind, the repaired robot, the quiet pride in his son's eyes that morning. This interview was not about ambition. It was about survival, about keeping a roof over their heads, about honoring the promise he had made in a hospital room years ago. He told himself someone else would hear the voice. Someone else would help. Someone else would stop. No one did. Daniel stepped into the alley. Half hidden behind a fallen slab of concrete lay a woman in her mid-30s, her dark blazer torn and coated in gray dust. Blood ran from a gash on her forehead, tracing a thin line down her temple. Her left leg was trapped beneath the concrete at an angle that made Daniel's stomach tighten with professional clarity. This was bad. Very bad. Her eyes locked onto his, wide and glassy, clinging to him, as if he were the last solid thing left in a world that had just betrayed her. "I can't feel my leg," she whispered. Daniel dropped his portfolio. In that instant, the interview ceased to exist. Titles, salaries, future plans dissolved into irrelevance. What remained was a human problem, immediate and unforgiving. He knelt beside her, assessing with the calm precision he used on failing machines. The slab weighed hundreds of pounds. The bleeding suggested more than a simple fracture. Shock was a real risk. Time was not on their side. "Okay," he said, his voice steady, even as his pulse thundered. "I'm here. I've got you." Her eyes flickered with something like relief. "You should go," she murmured. "You were in a hurry. I could see it." Daniel lied without hesitation. Nowhere important. He called emergency services, the operator's voice strained, overwhelmed. Help was coming, but delayed. Could he stay? Could he assist? Daniel looked at his watch one last time. 9:24. 6 minutes past the point of no return. Evan's small voice echoed in his memory, asking about pizza Fridays, about whether his mom would be proud. Daniel swallowed and made his decision fully completely, without reservation. "I'm staying," he said into the phone. "Tell me what to do." He removed his tie, the only one he owned, and wrapped it tightly above her wound, ignoring her cry of pain. He spoke to her constantly, keeping her focused present. He found broken boards, used them as levers, lifting the slab inch by inch with raw determination. His suit jacket became padding, his shirt became bandages. His future slipped quietly away with every passing second. But he did not let go of her hand. In that alley amid dust and blood and ruin, Daniel Brooks was no longer a man rushing toward success. He was something far more dangerous and far more powerful. He was a man choosing who he was, even if the cost was everything else. The ambulance arrived at 9:55 in the morning, its siren cutting through the alley like a blade. By then, Daniel Brooks barely recognized himself. His hands were coated in dried blood and gray dust, his shirt torn into uneven strips, his suit ruined beyond repair. Paramedics moved with sharp efficiency, sliding a stretcher beneath the woman, securing her leg, checking vitals. One of them looked at Daniel with open respect and said something about quick thinking, about how he had likely saved her life. Daniel nodded, but the words barely reached him. His entire awareness was fixed on the woman's face as her eyes fluttered open one last time. She searched for him through the chaos, her lips moving. "Thank you," she breathed, or maybe she said something else. Daniel was not sure. Then the doors closed, and she was gone, swallowed by flashing lights and urgency. The alley fell quiet again, stripped of purpose. Daniel stood alone, staring at the dark stain spreading across the concrete, where moments ago a life had almost ended. Only then did reality crash back into him. He checked his watch. 10 o'clock. The interview had started 30 minutes earlier. The final round. The last door. He looked down at himself, at the shredded remains of the man who had walked into the station that morning believing control was possible. He laughed once short and hollow, then stopped. There was no humor left in it. Daniel walked to the North Line building anyway. The lobby was chaos. Employees streamed out under evacuation order, security guards shouting directions, glass being taped off. The receptionist barely glanced at him when he approached, blood still dark on his cuffs. "I had an interview," he said quietly. 14th floor, engineering. She shook her head without hesitation. "All interviews are canceled. We do not know when or if they will be rescheduled. Please evacuate the building." Outside, the city felt altered like a familiar face with a new scar. Daniel walked 2 blocks and sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. An email notification. He did not need to open it, but he did anyway. "Due to today's events, your interview has been canceled. We will not be rescheduling at this time. Thank you for your interest. Not postponed, not delayed. Canceled." The word settled heavily in his chest. 6 months of preparation, 2 grueling interview rounds, late nights studying while Evan slept, all erased in a single sentence. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about Evan waiting at school expecting good news. He thought about the apartment, the bills, the envelope on the counter. He thought about how close he had come to a different life and how quickly it had slipped away. And yet beneath the grief, something unexpected stirred. He remembered the woman's eyes in the alley, the way they had locked onto him, as if he were the only thing anchoring her to the world. He remembered her voice saying, "Please don't leave me." He understood with painful clarity that had he walked away, No amount of success would have silenced that moment. He would have carried it forever, heavier than any debt. Daniel stood straightening his torn jacket. People passed him without a second glance, seeing only another man shaken by disaster. None of them knew what he had given up. None of them knew the weight of the choice he had made. And yet, for the first time since the earthquake, Daniel felt something solid beneath his grief. He had lost an opportunity. But he had not lost himself. As he turned toward Evan's school, Daniel Brooks carried nothing but what mattered: his integrity, his promise, and the quiet knowledge that even when the world took everything else, he had chosen to be the kind of man his son could one day understand. The days that followed moved with a dull grinding weight, as if time itself had been damaged by the earthquake and never fully recovered. Daniel Brooks returned to his routine with the same quiet discipline that had carried him through grief before waking before dawn. Making coffee in the half-light, packing Evan's lunch with careful attention. Nothing looked different on the surface, yet everything had shifted underneath. The interview was gone. The future he had imagined was gone with it. What remained was the present, unforgiving and demanding to be faced without illusion. At school pickup, Evan ran to him as usual, backpack bouncing, eyes bright with questions he had been saving all day. "Did you get the job, Dad?" Daniel knelt, brushing dust from his son's sleeve, choosing his words with the same care he used when tightening a bolt that could not afford to slip. "The building had an emergency, buddy. Things got messy downtown." Evan studied his father's torn shirt, the faint bruise darkening his wrist, the exhaustion Daniel could not hide. "Did you help someone?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. Someone really needed it." Evan considered this, then smiled with a small, solemn pride that tightened Daniel's throat. That was the end of the questions. Work resumed at the mid-sized engineering firm where Daniel had spent the past 8 years quietly fixing other people's mistakes. The same desk, the same hum of machines, the same ceiling he had stared at through countless lunch breaks, wondering how long a man could keep waiting for his life to begin. His supervisor mentioned the earthquake in passing, then moved on to production schedules and minor delays. No one asked where Daniel had been that morning. No one noticed that he was carrying something heavier than before. The envelope from the bank did not go away. Another letter arrived, then another. The numbers were unkind, shrinking his options to almost nothing. Daniel spent his lunch breaks on the phone, negotiating payment plans, listening to polite voices explain policies that did not bend for circumstance or character. At night, after Evan slept, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with spreadsheets and a calculator, trying to find combinations that ended in hope instead of loss. Most nights, they did not. Sometimes in the quiet hours, his thoughts drifted back to the alley, to the woman's face, to the way her hand had tightened around his as if instinct recognized safety before logic could catch up. He wondered if she had survived surgery, if she could walk, if she remembered him at all. He told himself it did not matter. He had not stayed for thanks. He had stayed because leaving would have broken something essential inside him. Yet doubt crept in when exhaustion stripped away resolve. Was kindness a luxury he could no longer afford? Had he failed Evan by choosing a stranger over stability? Daniel would watch his son sleep, the steady rise and fall of his chest grounding him, and remind himself of the promise he had made. Not to be rich, not to be powerful, to be present, to be someone Evan could trust when the world shook. Weeks passed. The city repaired itself with scaffolding and fresh glass, as if erasing evidence of vulnerability. Daniel felt no such restoration. He moved forward because stopping was not an option, because being a father did not allow for surrender. Still beneath the fatigue and uncertainty, something unexpected had taken root. A quiet certainty that the choice he made that morning, costly as it was, had defined him more clearly than any job title ever could. Daniel Brooks had been overlooked his entire life, underestimated, measured incorrectly. But in the moment that mattered most, when no one was watching and nothing could be gained, he had revealed a kind of power the world rarely recognizes until it is too late. And somewhere unseen by him, that truth was already beginning to circle back. 3 weeks after the earthquake, Daniel Brooks was sitting alone in a small coffee shop on Broadway in Oakland, the kind of place where the tables wobbled slightly, and the barista remembered your order without asking. It was his lunch break, though he barely tasted the coffee growing cold in front of him. His laptop was open, a half-finished spreadsheet glowing on the screen, numbers blurring as his mind drifted elsewhere. He was thinking about bills, about time, about how quickly opportunities disappeared once you blinked. Then someone sat down at the table beside him, and Daniel felt it before he saw it. A sudden tightening in his chest, a sense of the past rising up to meet him. She looked different from the woman in the alley, polished and composed, her dark hair pulled back neatly, a faint scar, barely visible near her hairline. She walked with a slight limp, leaning on a slim cane, but her posture was straight, controlled. Daniel recognized her instantly anyway. The eyes were the same, focused, searching. She reached for her coffee at the same moment Daniel stood to stretch, and they nearly collided. She apologized automatically, then looked up. Recognition spread across her face in slow disbelief. "It's you," she said, her voice unsteady. Daniel nodded, words failing him for once. "You're okay?" he managed. Her breath caught. "I've been trying to find you." They sat together, the space between them suddenly heavy with unspoken memory. She told him her name was Laura Mitchell. She told him she had survived because someone stayed when it would have been easier to leave. The doctors had said minutes mattered. She said thank you not once, but several times, as if repetition might begin to cover the debt she felt. Daniel waved it off, uncomfortable with gratitude that felt too large. Anyone would have done the same, he said, though both of them knew it was not true. Then Laura asked a question that shifted the air entirely. "Were you on your way to something that morning? An interview?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Final round. North Line Engineering Group." Laura went still. The color drained from her face. Slowly, carefully, she spoke again. "Daniel, I am the head of human resources at Northline. I was the one scheduled to interview you that morning." The words landed like a second earthquake, quieter, but no less powerful. Daniel stared at her, stunned pieces rearranging themselves too fast to grasp. Laura closed her eyes briefly, emotion breaking through her composure. "You gave up everything to save me," she said softly. "And you did not even know who I was." In that moment, Daniel understood something with absolute clarity. Fate had tested him without revealing the stakes, and he had answered anyway. Laura Mitchell did not offer him the job right away. She sat there in the quiet hum of the coffee shop, fingers wrapped tightly around her cup, studying Daniel Brooks as if she were seeing him clearly for the first time. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, deliberate. "I can arrange another interview," she said. "A private one. What happened that day was not your fault. You deserve the chance you earned." The offer hung between them, heavy with implication, with power quietly revealed. Daniel felt the old instinct rise immediately, the reflex to refuse help, to carry everything alone. He exhaled slowly before answering. "I appreciate that," he said, and meant it, "but I cannot do that." Laura frowned, confused. Why not? Because if I take that interview now, I will never know if I was chosen for my ability or for what I did for you. And I need to know that. For myself. For my son. The words surprised even him with their certainty. He had lost the job, but not his standards. Laura studied him in silence, then nodded once respect replacing shock. That is rare, she admitted. Most people would not hesitate. She leaned back slightly, her expression shifting from executive to something more human. Then let me help you in another way. Not as repayment. As recognition. Daniel listened as she spoke about consulting work, about companies quietly struggling with inefficiencies that someone like him could solve. You see systems differently, she said. Northline noticed that. Others will too. What began as a single conversation became several. Coffee turned into planning sessions. Laura made introductions, not favors. She never spoke of the alley again unless Daniel did. Slowly, reluctantly, he began to imagine something he had not allowed himself before. Independence. Control. A future not dependent on a single company's approval. Within a month, Brooks Engineering Solutions existed on paper, then in reality. One client, then another. Small at first, but real. Through it all, Laura remained present in quieter ways. She met Evan at the park one afternoon, listened seriously as he explained the mechanics of his latest robot, praised his ideas without condescension. Evan, who rarely warmed to strangers, took her hand without hesitation. Daniel watched it happen with a mixture of gratitude and fear, aware of how easily hope could become risk. The business grew slowly, honestly. Daniel worked harder than ever, but the work belonged to him now. He chose projects. He chose hours. He showed up for school events and late-night questions and pizza Fridays that never disappeared. And Laura, without ever forcing her way in, became part of the rhythm of their lives. What the world still did not see was the truth beneath it all. Daniel Brooks was no longer the man scrambling for permission to succeed. He was building something of his own on his terms, guided not by ambition alone, but by the same principle that had stopped him in that alley. When everything was on the line, character came first. And now finally, the world was beginning to respond in kind. 6 months after the earthquake, Daniel Brooks stood in the small backyard of a modest house on the edge of Oakland, watching his son kneel in the dirt with intense concentration. Evan was explaining in great detail why the yellow roses needed more space than the sunflowers, his hands moving, as if he were already designing the garden in his mind. Laura Mitchell stood nearby, sleeves rolled up, soil smudged on her cheek, listening to him with the same seriousness she once reserved for boardroom discussions. The sight struck Daniel with quiet force. This, he realized, was the life that had grown from the moment he thought he had lost everything. Brooks Engineering Solutions was no longer an experiment. It was thriving. Daniel had secured multiple long-term clients, including a renewable energy startup that credited his design insight with saving their flagship project. Money was no longer a constant emergency. The bank notices had stopped. They had let the apartment go and chosen this house instead, not as a retreat from the past, but as an expansion into something new. The garage now served as Daniel's office, its walls covered with diagrams and whiteboards, its door often open so Evan could wander in with questions. Work and family no longer lived on opposite sides of his life. They breathed in the same space. Laura had not replaced anyone. She never tried. She honored the past with quiet respect, asking Evan about his mother, listening when memories surfaced, never competing with a ghost. Over time, she became something else entirely. A presence, a partner, someone who stayed. When she eventually moved in, The transition felt less like a change and more like a recognition of what had already been true. Evan accepted it with the clarity of a child who understands love before language complicates it. Family to him was who showed up. One evening, as the three of them ate dinner beneath the string lights Daniel had hung in the yard, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar email, an acquisition offer. A large firm wanted to buy Brooks Engineering Solutions outright. The number made his chest tighten, not with excitement, but with unease. Financial security beyond anything he had imagined. Freedom from risk. The kind of offer people dreamed of. Daniel read it twice, then closed his phone without responding. Later that night, after Evan slept, Daniel sat with Laura on the porch. He told her about the offer, about what it represented. She listened as she always did, without pushing, without steering. When he finished, she asked a single question. "What do you want Evan to learn from this choice?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He thought about the alley, about the interview he never attended, about the man he had been before the world shook him awake. "I want him to know that success means choosing what matters," he said finally, "even when it costs you." The next morning, Daniel declined the offer. Life did not become perfect. Work was still demanding, parenting was still humbling, love still required courage. But the fear that once ruled him had loosened its grip. He was no longer defined by what he lacked or what he had lost. He was defined by the choices he continued to make day after day in moments large and small. One afternoon, Evan looked up from his latest robot project and said very casually, "Dad, if you had gone to that interview, none of this would have happened, right?" Daniel paused and then nodded. "Probably not." Evan smiled, satisfied. "Then I'm glad you didn't go." Daniel stepped outside and watched the garden sway in the breeze, the yellow roses turning toward the sun. He thought of the morning everything changed, of the ground breaking open beneath his feet, of a voice asking him not to leave. He had chosen to stay. He had chosen kindness over certainty. And in doing so, he had found a future richer than the one he had been chasing. Sometimes, the moment that looks like failure is only the doorway to the life you were meant to build. From a psychological and human behavior perspective, Daniel's story reminds us that true success is not defined by titles, income, or recognition, but by the values we protect when no one is watching. In moments of crisis, the brain seeks self-preservation. Yet, character is revealed when we choose responsibility for others over personal gain. Daniel did not lose an opportunity that day. He exchanged it for alignment, the rare state where actions, values, and identity move in the same direction. Research consistently shows that people who live in alignment experience deeper fulfillment, stronger relationships, and long-term resilience, even when the path is harder at first. If this story resonated with you, if it made you pause and reflect on what you would choose when everything is on the line, take a moment to like and subscribe. These stories exist to remind us what truly matters, and your support helps them reach the people who may need them most. And now tell us in the comments, in just a few words, choose kindness